causes is, first we're going to be looking at why the French Revolution is so important. And secondly, we're going to be looking at what were the causes of the French Revolution. We're moving on from modern, to the most important political revolution of the Enlightenment. Yesterday we talked about the scientific revolution. We talked about how Isaac Newton, one of the big lights of the scientific revolution, moved us away from René Descartes' rationalism and into empiricism, which is kind of carried today. We also talked about astronomy and changes there, and how Galileo and Copernicus and Kepler changed our view of our place in the solar system. And we also looked at a couple of political philosophers yesterday. Are there any questions that you have about Rousseau or any of those folks before we move on? No? Again, my goal is to have your tests for you on Friday. Assuming that we're here and all those cool things. Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at the French Revolution. The French Revolution is one of the major hinges of history. And what do I mean by a hinge of history? What I mean is that the French Revolution, in some place, and how we date history. My PhD, my primary field was in early modern European history. You might say, what the heck is early modern European history? What early modern is Renaissance to the French Revolution. Why is that 1400 to 1789 a breaking point? Well, because the French Revolution is what ushered in what we call the modern period. Okay? And it is that hinge where we go from kind of this early modern Renaissance Enlightenment worldview into some other aspects, how society really changes. Okay, so why is the French Revolution, why is it such this big change? Well, what's the big picture of the French Revolution? How does it change society? First of all, it's going to make our world a ton more secular. Now, what does the term secular mean? What's secular? See, we're missing Kelsey and Madeline today. Okay. What does secular mean?
Is that like when they distinguish where everything is? So this would be specifically France.
No, that would be nationalism.
Well, no.
It's not a bad guess. Secular. What's secular? Let me give you a hint. During the French Revolution, the Cathedral of Notre Dame had its title changed from the Cathedral of Notre Dame, Paris, to the Temple of Reason. So, what would that indicate about secularism? What is society turning away from? Religion. Okay? This is really the beginning of the turn away from religion. And you might say, well, what about the Renaissance? Well, in the Renaissance there was humanism, but there was still Christian humanism. Society is going to be more secular. That means it's going to be turning away more and more from religion. Okay? And you look at society today, and I think, you could argue that we are far more secular, but this is the starting point for that. Another reason why the French Revolution is so important is this is the beginning of the end of nobility. Now, being Americans, we don't really think about the idea of nobility that much. And by being noble, what am I referring to? This notion that you do what? You inherit wealth, power, and title. So your position in society is strictly based on the idea that you are born into a certain society. You are born into a certain class. So because my father was a baron, I'm going to be a baron. Or my father was an earl, I will be an earl. And this is going to be the beginning, the end of this. Okay? The French Revolution is going to abolish nobility in France for a time. And ultimately today, in France, there is no nobility. Okay? There are no dukes or lords or kings of France. Closely related to that is a new concept. And that new concept is equality. The motto of the French Revolution was brotherhood, fraternity, and equality. And equality was a radical concept. Now in America, we take for granted the idea that all men are created equal, because it said so in our founding documents, that all men are created equal. Don't know about women, but all men are created equal. Now, we kind of take that for granted. But what had the entire history of the Western world been to that point? It had been not that. It had been that people were different. Why was somebody considered to be a king? Because he was better. Okay? And now the idea that everyone should be equal before the law. This idea of equality just was radical for a lot of people. Another key characteristic, just kind of emphasize this idea of equality. During the French Revolution, they got rid of the idea of Mr., Mrs., Sir, Doctor, whatever. There were no titles, just citizen. Citizen Harris, Citizen Miller, Citizen Reeves. It's equality. And they really did stress that. For a brief, one of the other big changes is the idea that we should have representative government. We should have representative government. Keep in mind, for much of history, you might say, well, what about ancient Athens and what about the Roman Republic? But remember, the Roman Republic fell at the very latest in 27 BC, and some might argue before that with the rise of Octavian or the first Caesar or Caesar Augustus. But really, for most of Western history, there had not been representative government. One citizen, one vote, or major legislative branch, particularly in France. And now the idea is that you need representative democracy. And that's a really big deal. Because now the idea is that the average citizen should have a voice in government. Another big deal that happens out of the French Revolution, that revolutionizes the world, and you may hate it, but I think there's a lot of good things that come out of it, is the French Revolution is what creates public education for the first time. Because if everyone's going to have to participate in government, what does everyone have to be able to also do?
Like
Read and write. You've got to be able to read things. And I am certainly not arguing that public education is perfect today. However, how many of your friends do you know that are functionally illiterate?
None. Absolutely none.
Absolutely none.
They don't know the difference between two theirs, partially.
Partially. Now, the reason I bring this up is that only the wealthy elites went to schools prior to the French Revolution for the most part. And now everyone could go there. And I got to be honest with you, I don't know if I could afford, bless you, private tuition at $8,000 to $10,000 for 4 kids. You know, if there were no such thing as public schools. And the French Revolution said everyone needs the opportunity. And I think that's kind of cool. Another thing the French Revolution brought about, and why it's kind of a big picture, is the French Revolution is going to bring about nationalism. Now, we know that nationalism started, with things like the 30 Years' War, but this is going to be kind of like the epidemic of nationalism. We're going to look at the French national anthem, which talks about watering the fields of France with the blood of our enemies. That's nationalism on crack, folks. That's the idea that we as French people are better than other people.
Is that still on there?
They've toned it down a little bit. But man, I'll tell you what, that'll make you sing. Yes, ma'am.
Before public education, were the poor people, like, was it against the law for them to get taught anything? Because I know in some countries it was like that.
It really wasn't against the law, but it was just something that was unobtainable for them.
Okay.
And that's a great question. It's not so much that they didn't keep them, that they persecuted them for not doing this, but why? And so the French Revolution is going to radically change how Europe is. Another way that it radically changes things is it's going to basically create the first massive draft. And by draft, I don't mean like rush of cold air. What I mean by draft is that its citizens were created. With the levée en masse in 1793, what's going to happen now is that France, a country about the size of Texas, is going to draft 750,000 males to fight. And what does that make France into?
A superpower.
A superpower, you're exactly right. Because other countries did not have that draft, and then quickly after the Napoleonic Wars, everyone's going to have that kind of draft. The French Revolution is a massive change. One other, but I would say incredibly negative change that happens during the French Revolution is the French Revolution is also the first example of modern totalitarianism. Because there's a real dark period during the French Revolution called the Reign of Terror. And during the Reign of Terror, there is a guy by the name of Maximilien Robespierre, and we'll come back and talk about him in some greater depth, who wants to make sure that everyone in France is with the revolution. And he wants to purify the revolution. So after the people of France had invented a new, better way of executing people, the guillotine, he executed over 30,000 people. If you did not adhere to what his party said, chop chop. And that also, unfortunately, is kind of the birthplace of modern totalitarianism during the Reign of Terror of Robespierre. Now, I do want to ask this question for you. What was so revolutionary about the French Revolution? What was so revolutionary about the French Revolution? Well, the French Revolution, I would argue, is a true change, in part because it did all of the things I've just mentioned. It brought about all of these things that really hadn't been done before. It brought about nationalism, it brought about draft, it brought about public schools, it brought about secularism, it brought about Enlightenment principles. However, the irony is at the beginning of the French Revolution, though. So on one hand, it does cause radical changes. But a revolution can mean two things. Radical change, and a revolution can also be like a wheel. Let's say this is a wheel. It's more like a cylinder, but let's say, whoops, I spilled it on me. Actually, I didn't spill it on me, but I almost did. And who knows what was in this. If you turn this around, if I start here, I turn this around all the way, what do we call this? A revolution. Very good. I can tell you're in science.
Yeah.
You got it. It's a revolution. Now, a revolution means you go all the way around, and when you start here and it revolves all the way around, it's in the exact same spot. So when the French Revolution started, they had an absolute monarch, Louis XVI. When the French Revolution ended, they had an absolute emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte. They went through all of that change, but at the end of the day, what's different?
The name.
The name. Went from an absolute king to an absolute emperor.
That's interesting.
The more things change, folks, the more they stay the same.
Don't edit that part where he spilled whatever in that drink out.
Because that's the part you're just going to watch again and again and again and again. The tricolor is the French Revolution the banner of the French Revolution, and it's still the flag of France. I used to have one in here, but I think I gave my French flag to Mr. Lloyd to help cover his classroom.
Let's go to the field trip and see it.
No, let's don't.
My brother's in that class.
He just had a baby.
Mr. Lloyd did, really?
I have to look at the email. Baby Lloyd.
Baby boy.
Hey, Lloyd.
And liberty, fraternity, and equality. It's what the French Revolution is all
What
about.
does fraternity even actually mean?
Brotherhood.
Brotherhood?
That's what it
Well, I-
means.
I didn't know there's something deeper than that. All I think about is frat boys.
Yeah, and that's not deeper.
Ask Xander about some of his frat stories. They're really funny.
He
You know-
knows my brother, so.
Interesting.
Older one.
Yeah, they're really funny.
Older one.
Okay. Origins of the French Revolution. Okay. What are the reasons for the French Revolution, and where did the French Revolution come from? Well, the origins of the French Revolution, which starts in 1789, and let me just kind of give you the rough timeline of the French Revolution before we go further. Why don't we just go ahead and do this, and this will just make things a little bit easier for you as you go through this.
Thank you.
Timelines of the French Revolution. Okay, 1789 is the beginning date. And really, the kickoff is going to be a couple of key events in 1789, and I'll just give you kind of what those two key events are. The storming of the Bastille, which is on July 14th, and the tennis court oath. Those are 1789. And just the other one, it's in August, but I think it's August 4th, but don't worry about it. I'm not entirely sure it's August. Tennis court oath,
I take it to the
okay?
What was the first one? Storming of Bastille.
Storming of the Bastille. Okay. In the end of 1792, the constitutional monarchy ends. January 1793, Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette, are decapitated.
It was the 16th and who?
His queen, Marie Antoinette.
16 or 14?
16. 14's long smoldered in the ground by that point. From 1793 to 1794, you have what's known as the Reign of Terror by Robespierre. 1793 to 94, the Reign of Terror by Robespierre. From 94 to 99, you have a period that's known as the Directory. The Directory. And from 99 until 1815, you have Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. So that kind of gives you a broad framework of this period from 1789 into 1815. Okay? Now, that way you just kind of have a big kind of tree of a timeline to see where to hang your hats on this. Now, keep in mind, what are the origins of the French Revolution? One of the key origins of the French Revolution is France's absolutism. As you recall from the last unit, Louis XIII, Louis XIV, both had consolidated power. Louis XIV had built one of the wealthiest palaces in all of Europe, Versailles, according to Rick Steves, travel expert par excellence. 50% of the GDP of France was used to build the Versailles Paris. The Versailles Palace, the Versailles Paris. It sounds like a theme park. Versailles Paris tomorrow. It's what you're building. And also at the end of Louis XIII's reign, he fought a lengthy war with some of the other major powers of Europe to put his grandson Philip on the throne in Spain. And foreign wars cost a lot of money. He depleted the treasury a lot. Okay? Another issue that was going on in France at this time was just the cultural climate. There were some things that were going on culturally that are going to lead toward revolution. One of those cultural issues we talked about yesterday, and that was the debauchery of the nobility. What is being debauched? What is debauchery? Maybe some of your older brother's frat stories would deal with this,
My
or
brother doesn't have,
Bander.
Banger's frat story, sorry.
no, Banjo just acts like my brother is his son when he sees him.
Really?
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Little Jake,
Are there, well, never mind.
I don't know. They're close, I guess.
That's great. I'm glad they have
A bond.
a bond. All right, debauchery. That's nasty stuff. Gross, nasty stuff. And what were the nobles doing? I think I mentioned that to you yesterday. The Marquis de Sade, what was he doing? Nasty stuff. And what was he doing nasty stuff with? His peasants.
Is this where he beat them to get?
Where we get the idea, where we get the term sadism,
Oh, okay.
where you do bad things for kicks. Yes, it originates with the Marquis de Sade. So what were nobles? Crude, rude. So there was kind of the cultural climate, and if you're a middle class person and you saw in the bookstore rack the Diary of the Marquis de Sade, what would you think about nobles? They're repulsive, they're terrible. And a lot of the nobles lived in opulence, and they were just not very nice people. You have the Enlightenment philosopher Rousseau saying, boy, we need to strip away culture and get back to a state of nature. We talked about Rousseau yesterday in that regard, and Rousseau is just like, hey, we need to start over, because civilization is actually a corrosive element. It's like road salt on a 15-year-old car. What's going to happen? It's just going to eat it away, right? And so what you need to do is strip all that away and get back to the roots of humanity. Start over. And what's the way that you start over? As the Beatles say, you have a revolution, right? You've got to have a revolution. And then, of course, what's the general notion of the Enlightenment? What does the Enlightenment say about divine right monarchy?
Don't work.
Don't work. Exactly. So there's also some other things that are going on during this time period. One of the things that a lot of people talk about is that, you know, revolution always accompanies extreme poverty. And really, if you look at the revolutions of the last 250 years, that's really wrong. Revolutions usually accompany a rising middle class. Why? Well, it's because the middle class was growing in France, and they were getting economic power. But what did they not have? Well, they had money.
Support?
They had, and some of them had education, but what else? They had no political power. Now, what's the basis of political power?
Blood.
What?
Blood.
Sometimes. Well, it was in nobility, yes, you're right. But in our society, what's the basis of political power? Think
Money.
President Trump.
Money?
Money, right?
This morning,
You know, if you want to be powerful in our society, you largely have to have money, right? There are very few poor people that are powerful. So what's kind of going on here? There is a growing, not to sound like a Marxist here, but there is a growing class conflict, but not the way that maybe Marx would argue. There's a rising middle class that had a growing economic power, but it did not have political power. France had, at this time, a parliament, but that parliament did not really work. It was called the Estates General, and it was a tricameral legislature. Of course, ours is a bicameral with the House of Representatives and the Senate. Their Estates General had three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the bourgeoisie. Now, the clergy and the nobility were really less than 5% of the French population. The bourgeoisie was supposed to represent the remaining 95%. And the bourgeoisie literally meant middle class. Marx is going to do that as the upper class, but 95%. But the way the tax and representative system was, is that the other two estates could veto anything that came out of the bourgeoisie's estate. Which meant, what about the bourgeoisie? They effectively had no power. As we're moving toward the French Revolution in 1789, ladies and gentlemen, as we're moving toward the French Revolution in 1789, the Estates General had not been called into session since 1614. Now, I haven't had math since 1990, but I'll try to do math, simple arithmetic here at the board. That's 175 years. Okay? So let's take 2019 and subtract 175 years. That gives us 4. 1844. So this takes us back to the age of Andy Jackson.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there a difference? I mean, the Trail of Tears would have been going down during this time period. We hadn't yet fought a war with Mexico to get Texas and California and all of those other things. Missouri had just merely become a state 23 years before. And as a good Missourian, you could own slaves to your heart's content.
Why are we cheering for that?
Yeah, it kind of scares me that you did cheer for this. Woo! I can own people! Yes! Make America slave again! Like, whoa, here guys, don't cheer slavery! Don't cheer slavery, that's not good! I mean, I'm one thing that I will say, I don't want to get political in class, but I am firmly opposed to slavery. That's where I plant my flag. Okay. Okay, so you can see how this was a long time. And if the Estates General was supposed to increase taxes, guess what had happened to the amount of taxes?
A lot more? They go down?
Had they been able to raise them? No. I mean, the kings had tried to do things with different things like the nobility of the sword and robe and all those kinds of things, but really there was a massive financial crisis. Now, what was precipitating this massive financial crisis? Well, if Louis XIV spent half of the gross domestic product of France on his palace, what does that mean for everything else? Doesn't have a lot of money. What about if he's spending a large portion on it on foreign wars? Doesn't have a lot of money. So if you don't have money and you're spending money, what does that mean that you're doing?
Going into debt.
Going into debt.
I know a lot of-
And that's what France is going to do. France is going to go into debt. And just like, I don't know, many of you are, getting ready to leave Farmington High School as seniors and go on your way. You have credit cards.
Debit card.
You have a debit card. Credit cards are a little bit different because each month, if you have a credit card, you probably know this. Oh my, there goes your bug.
No, the lady.
Bye, Charlie.
Oh my.
Fly or be free, Charlie! Be like the rebels when they stormed the Bastille in France! Be free! Embrace it! Don't stand by your tyrannical dictator here, Kat Beckley and her clan! Be free! Embrace your freedom, but don't go toward the light!
He's gonna die
There
now.
it is.
He really is.
I literally was just looking.
And
I was like, man.
30,000 people died in the French Revolution, too, by the guillotine.
Wait,
Should we put him in there?
Wait.
Put Charlie in that little.
It needs to be sharpened.
Let's not. I don't want to see him die.
No, we'll just sweep him up later.
Oh, where'd he go? He's gone. No, he's up there. Oh, I see him.
He's gonna figure out how to get inside, and then he's not gonna be able to figure out how to get out, and then he's gonna dry up and die up there and be up there for 10 years until they
Yeah.
change it and not fix the problem.
But in that way, Charlie will always be with me.
Yes.
I'm excited. Okay. Well, what's going to happen? Well, if you don't have money, if you have a credit card, one of the interesting things I've always found about credit cards is, you get a monthly statement in the mail, and they always put like a minimum amount that you can pay. So let's say I've charged $1,000. I may have to pay a minimum amount of $25, which means effectively that I will never pay it off, and it means that there's compounded interest, and if it's 18% interest, it means I'm going to owe just ton and ton and ton and ton and ton of money over time. And it is a terrible thing. That's why you never want to leave a revolving balance on a credit card. If you're going to use a credit card, you just need to use it like a debit, if you will, and just write a check at the end of the month. Otherwise, you're going to be taken for a ride. Well, France basically charged all of its expenses. They took out loans from banks. And the problem is, interest is going to be compounding and accruing, so ultimately, you may have a debt of so much, but then you're going to be owing on interest for the money that you borrowed. There's also another problem involved with that. If you have a lot of debt, and you're the French government, then you're sucking up a lot of the credit in France, and so therefore if Pierre here wants to open a new business, Pierre doesn't have a bank that has money to loan because the bank's loaned all the money to the French government. So you can't expand your bakery where you make baguettes and other tasty French pastries.
Baguettes?
Baguettes.
I know all about those.
You do know about because you work at Panera.
Forgot my baguette.
What?
It is bread. Now, there is Louis XVI is going to try to fix things a little bit. He appoints Jacques Turgot, who is a fan of Adam Smith and his Enlightenment capitalistic policies. And what Jacques Turgot is going to say, okay, we need to let market policies take place. We're going to need to operate on supply and demand and try to make all this stuff work. So one of the things that he does is he says we need to establish some laissez-faire concepts. And remember, what does laissez-faire mean in French? Hands off. The government needs to stop regulating the economy. Well, in France, how did the kings from Louis XIII, XIV on make sure that the people of the cities were happy with the king? Well, they basically subsidized bread to where it was almost free. So if it cost $2 or 2 francs, as they would say in France, to make a baguette, they might only charge you 2 cents. And so people were happy about that.
Let them eat cake.
But the problem is, if you're subsidizing, if the true cost of the loaf of bread is $2 and you're only charging 2 cents, where's that money coming from?
The government.
The government. Okay? And the government's not raising taxes, so where does it get its money? The loans, the banks. So what Turgot says is, look, if it costs $2, we can't subsidize it. It needs to, the consumer needs to pay $2. Now, if you're a poor Frenchman in the street of Paris or Marseille, what are you going to be saying now?
Yay.
Oh, no! I'm not going to be saying that. Do I want to pay $2 for a baguette or 2 cents?
2 cents.
2 cents! This is wrong! The king is persecuting me! I hate this king and his stupid ideas. So they're going to get rid of the grain subsidies. Turgot's also going to say is, well, if we want to start paying down our deficit, what are we going to have to do? Raise taxes. How do the middle class feel about raising taxes?
That's stupid.
Stupid. You will not raise my tax. No, that's more Italian, sorry. You will not raise my tax. No. Raise my taxes, no. The other thing is that he's going to do is abolish guilds. And I don't know if you remember what guilds were in medieval society, but they were kind of like vocational training meets labor unions. So if I wanted to become a master cobbler or shoemaker, what am I going to do? I'm going to be a novice with a master cobbler. He's going to train me how to make a shoe. Then if I'm good enough, after a few years, I will graduate and be a journeyman. And then at the very end, after I make my beautiful masterpiece of a shoe, what will I be considered? A master. Very good. And then I can charge the rate that the guild sets for making shoes. Okay? And of course, if a guild sets the price of shoes or a loaf of bread or whatever product the guild makes, what is not determining the price?
The sailor?
The market.
Yeah.
And what does Adam Smith's capitalism say? Who should make that determination? The seller, the marketplace. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
The marketplace. The invisible hand of the market should make that decision. So he's like, no, we got to pull all this off. Well, how do you think Turgot was received by the working class, the middle class, everybody else? They absolutely hate it. Now, were his ideas good?
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably would have fixed France had they been able to be put in place for a decade. But Louis XVI would have been a great king in a time that was really easy, because he was a very mediocre king. But in a time of crisis, he was not the guy that you needed. And so, what did he do to Turgot?
Killed him.
He didn't kill him, he fired him.
Oh.
And he brought in Jacques Necker. And Necker basically said, you know what, let's go back to the old ways. I'm just going to borrow money. We're going to have grain subsidies. The guilds are going to be able to do what they want to do. And so what's going to happen to France's national debt now?
Now it's just skyrocketing.
Skyrocketing up, 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 up. And this is going to be a problem. Finally, Louis fires him, hires Charles Calon, who, his decision is, well, we'll raise land taxes, but only on the nobility. Which also was political suicide. So what's going to happen then is the Estates General are going to get together. The Estates General are going to get together at Versailles, and the three estates are going to vote separately. Now this takes place in summer of 1789. Keep in mind, what has happened in the United States from 1776 to this period? You had the American Revolution and the establishment of the United States of America. And what type of government did the United States of America have? A constitutional republic. So this is going to inspire the middle class of France. Keep in mind, who was the United States' #1 ally? France. They'd sent over the Marquis de Lafayette, a young French nobleman, to help Washington. In fact, if you travel around the United States, there's a Lafayette, Indiana, and there's a Lafayette, Ohio. And you go through, there are a lot of Lafayettes. Why are there Lafayettes? Because it was named after this French war hero.
Is that what Lafayette Ice was named after?
Yep. Lafayette. Now, so that's going to inspire them. On June 17th, the tennis court oath takes place, in which the middle class representatives to the bourgeoisie tennis court, or estate, sit down on Louis XVI rather's tennis court at Versailles Palace, and said, "We ain't moving until you adopt another form of government. We ain't moving. We must have a constitutional monarchy. We want a national assembly. We do not want a tricameral legislature where the nobility and the clergy, only 5% of the population, basically get to dictate things with you, the king. We ain't moving. We're staying here." And Louis said, "But I want to play tennis. It is time for the tennis season, and I cannot play." And so they say, "Well, look here, Sparky. If you want to play tennis, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to reform the government." So what does Louis do? Says, "I will play soccer." No, he gives in.
He likes tennis that much?
He loves tennis that much.
This is Louis XVI.
Louis XVI. Louis XVI. Louis.
This is a side note, but Ethan wanted me to ask if he needs to go to the ambassador's meeting.
It's up to him.
Okay.
It's 16.
Yeah, I was like, yeah.
Let's just say 6.
Okay. So, what's going to happen then is there's going to be a popular revolution in the streets that take place. And on July 14th, this happened on, the tennis court oath happened on June 17th. On July 14th is the storming of the Bastille. The Bastille was actually where the Grand Opera House is in Paris today. But the Bastille was kind of an odd kind of thing in the center of Paris. Of course, Paris is the capital city. The Bastille was a combination armory and prison. Bad combination. Why is that a bad combination? What's an armory keep besides floats for homecoming?
Weapons.
Weapons, guns, and you keep political prisoners there. Can you see, imagine anything that could possibly go wrong? We're keeping all of our guns and ammos and cannons here together with a whole bunch of our prisoners. That's what I'm going to do. For Potosi Prison, I'm just going to keep all sorts of M16s and assault rifles there ready to go just in case they break out.
That's
They
smart.
grab the guns.
So that's basically what happened. The people of Paris stormed the Bastille because they thought it was unfair that political prisoners were being kept because they had rallied against the king. They took the munitions that were there, and this kind of led to a popular revolution in the streets of Paris. As I said, there was kind of a converging, and this is a painting of David that embodied that. That's another painting of David of the people on the tennis court. By the way, tennis balls back then were very heavy. They weren't like they are today. It was more like, what's
Were
that?
the rackets the same? Yeah, they had Babylons back then.
Yeah, they were way heavier too. But anyway, long story short, they get together, the new National Assembly on August 4th ends feudalism. So there's no peasants anymore, there's no serfs, there's no manor lords. They end nobility. Now folks, ending nobility. Think about what a sea change this is. Could you be lord or baron or duke or sir or anything like that anymore? All gone. You remember the nobility of the sword, nobility of the robe? You couldn't buy any of those positions anymore. All of that's gone. They adapted the tricolor as the flag, which showed the unity of all social classes, which was supposed to demonstrate the unity of all social classes in France. And that's still the French flag today. And they also adopted, pretty soon thereafter, the French Declaration, rights of man and citizen. And that, in essence, is kind of like our Bill of Rights. It declares certain natural laws that every citizen has. Certain things that no one can take away from them. Okay? Certain things that no one can take away from them. Pretty important stuff. Now, at this time, before we move on, the French Revolution in 1789 through 1792 is a constitutional monarchy. They haven't overthrown Louis XVI, but the model is more like England, okay? The model is more like England, where you're going to have a parliament that rules hand in hand with the king. But you know how I mentioned that Louis XVI wasn't super bright?
Yeah.
That's what's going to bring this down. Because Louis XVI wasn't super bright with some of the things that he did do. We'll come back to these guys in just a little bit. Let's talk about the new National Assembly that's in France. It is going to be different than, say, the English Parliament, because the English Parliament was bicameral, but this was unicameral. There's one house, because they've abolished nobility, so obviously there's no House of the Lords. They have a constitutional monarchy, and they can override any veto of the king with 3 successive votes. They begin to write and eventually ratify a constitution in 1791. And who can serve in government? Any tax-paying man. Any male can. Now, I will tell you the French Revolution was radical, but one of the things in which it was not radical is that women still didn't get political rights. And, you know, a lot of times we think about Europe being more progressive than the United States. Folks, when did women get the right to vote in the United States? 1920, with the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. When did women get the right to vote in France? Yeah, 1948.
Oh,
Oh, very good. So it wasn't until after World War II that women got the right to vote in France. You know, Simone de Beauvoir was kind of active in pushing for that. You know, and folks, this is kind of a thing. The French Revolution was radical, but one of the things it really wasn't radical on was the role of women. And we'll look at a couple of people who argued for equality of women tomorrow in the French Revolution. Marriage is going to be changed. The Catholic Church is going to lose its prominent place. And marriage had been, of course, a sacrament in the Catholic Church, but now marriage is a civil contract, legal contract, which means that can you also get divorced now? Yeah, you can. Since it's not religious per se, if you want to get divorced, you can get divorced. And they are going to eliminate primogeniture. Do you guys remember what primogeniture is?
Yes.
What is it?
Isn't it like if G's the oldest, he gets everything?
That's right. That's it. The oldest male son got everything. Now, with the Constitution of 1791, all the children would receive an equal slice of the inheritance, even women. It's kind of a radical step. Okay? So today, you know, let's say for instance, I have property, which I don't, but let's pretend I do. I have property, and I have 4 children. Who would get the property? Would we-
Today?
Yeah, today.
Everybody.
Everybody.
We
Okay.
can take people at your will now.
Well, you can take people, but I mean, before this time, even if you hated your eldest male child, who would get it all? Your eldest male child. Okay? And there you go.
Congrats, Abby.
There you go.
No.
Yeah, that's how it would have been.
Real tears.
Yes. Nothing for you, Abby. It's all about the Y chromosome. All about the Y chromosome. Never forget it. And then finally, public education. Education for all. Education for all. Yes?
What was the first bullet that you said the unit? Yeah, what was that?
One house. You know, like we have the House of Representatives and Senate, they would just have one. Okay? But things are going to kind of go bad to worse. I told you that Louis XVI was kind of not a really good guy. We get out of here at 40?
Yeah.
Okay. I always forget, is it 40 or is it 45 in here?
It's for all the hours on Tuesdays, Thursdays, it's end at 40.
End at 40. Okay, we'll stop here then.